Welcome to you all. My name is Des Kennedy. I'm a senior consultant here at Competitive Edge. Competitive Edge are a learning and development company. We specialize in sales and leadership training. Ambitious companies turn to us when looking to equip their people to excel in today's ever-changing modern business environment. Welcome to our webcast, our webinar. Today we're going to be talking about specifically about the ACE model. We're going to introduce you to the ACE model and take a deeper dive into it as a framework and how it can help you better structure your approach to interviews so that you can ultimately make better hiring decisions. Today's session will have an interactive element. You will have the opportunity to ask questions. Could I ask you, if you do have a question, please drop that question into the questions, the Q&A panel, and one of our team will pick that up and we get to them at the end. Hopefully we'll have the chance to answer all the questions. If not, we'll do our best to answer them after the webinar is finished. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded, so it will be available for everyone who has registered and attended the webinar, and that'll be available over the next few days. So hopefully everybody's okay with that. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Chris Barney. Hi, Chris, over to you.
Des, thank you ever so much. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Overwhelmed at the number of people really that have registered for the webinar. So thank you for showing a great interest. And of course, we want to make this as informative as possible for today. We've got I think as Des has just said, we've got a brief amount of time now to just give an overview of the ACE model, and of course, specifically in relation to interviewing. And I just want to sort of point out right from the start, if there are things that resonate with you at all today and we're not able to cover it in great detail, please do reach out and perhaps we can arrange a sort of a one-to-one just to talk through those parts. But in terms of the purpose of today's session, as you can see in front of you, it is basically looking at three specific elements of what is an effective talent management strategy. So the talent management strategy is literally from attraction all the way to sort of engagement and retention. But today, specifically in terms of the way the ACE model fits in to the attraction, the sourcing and recruitment, and of course, maybe a little bit around deployment and transition. We're going to spend the majority of our time, we'll get to it as quickly as we can. We're going to spend the majority of our time just looking at how the ACE model fits into those. So we need to give you a little bit of information around the ACE model. And then, of course, we need to talk specifically around the interview process, because that's where most people would use the assessment of interview when they're looking at recruitment. Now, a couple of stats that you can see on the screen. And these are, I think, hugely important just for us to reflect on for a few moments. Of course, many of you will be familiar with Competitive Edge. We are a learning and development organization, as Des was saying earlier. But even we realize that one of the biggest challenges that organizations face is recruiting the right people. So on many occasions, we'll be talking to organizations about the development of their people, and sometimes we'll have conversations with line managers, senior stakeholders that are saying things like, I just don't know if these people are right for us. And that's really quite an interesting conundrum to have, because we would, even though we're a learning and development organization, we would actually say that a bigger challenge in the people area is probably recruitment. Getting the right people recruited, onboarded into the role, performing, and of course being able to retain them is an enormous challenge. And the ripple effect of a bad hire is huge. It really is huge. We'll have a look at that in just a few moments. But you can see those two stats there. 80% of employee turnover is due to bad hiring decisions. That was a Harvard Business Review that was released not too long ago, but it is a really important stat to be reflecting on. One in five isn't due to a bad hire. So 1 in 5 might be that someone is retiring, or it's just a natural progression to another area. But actually 4 out of 5 hires, or 4 out of 5 of the people that leave, is due to a bad hiring decision. Now, that's actually quite a frightening statistic when you really think about it. 45% of bad hires are attributed to a lack of process. So many organizations don't actually have a proper recruitment process in place, which actually means that half of the people that are being recruited, or half of the businesses that are out there recruiting, are actually just allowing people to do it in a way that isn't necessarily right for your organization. So it's a really important couple of stats to reflect on and to think about what's going on in your business. And of course, with the changes to UK employment law, now is a really good time for you to be reflecting on actually how you can make those changes in order to secure yourself and protect yourself from what could be quite costly mistakes. So costly mistakes, what is the cost of a bad hire? Well, obviously it extends beyond more than just the salary that you've paid someone. So if you've obviously recruited somebody and you've let them go within a week, there are more than just a week's salary. If you've recruited someone for into the business, they've been with you for 3 or maybe 6 months, actually the ripple effect of the costs can be quite significant. Some of the calculators out there online will range from different numbers, but you can put in the direct attributable costs into that calculator. So you can put the salary, you can put the recruitment fees, you can put the line manager's time, you can put the training that you might put in. All of those are direct costs. But actually, what the calculator can do is start to understand a little bit about your business and tell you specifically where the indirect costs are impacting you. And there's a lot of research out there to show that someone that might have been enrolled for say 4, 5 or 6 months that doesn't work out, they don't pass the traditional probationary period, can actually cost a business around £132,000. Now that's based on sort of a mid-manager level range with a salary of about £42,000. So that's worth reflecting on. Do think about that just for the next few moments whilst you're going through this particular webinar, thinking about how you can use some of these tools and techniques to improve your own recruitment practices. Another stat that you can see on the screen there, 85% of HR decision makers admit that their organization has made a bad hire. So you're not alone. Guys, if you're sat there thinking to yourself, do you know what, we have got a little bit of a recruitment challenge right now, you're not alone. This is a problem within the industry. It is not easy to fix. And throwing a little bit of money at some training won't necessarily guarantee any form of improvement or any form of improved results. So what is it that you can do behind the scenes to give yourself a better chance? And we believe that using the ACE model will help you recruit and retain people better. Now, based on those costs, what's the ripple effect? Well, the ripple effect is quite literally, as you can see, it's the thing that carries on. It's the consequence that carries on after a particular event has started. You saw a question at the start of the webinar, and that was around the concept of what you think those consequences might actually be. Well, actually, when we think about the non-direct attributable things, it's coming down to things like lost productivity. So every single time you recruit someone into an organization that isn't working out, if your line manager or people within your business are spending more and more time with that person who isn't right for you, there is lost productivity from them as well as the person that you've recruited into the organization. And actually, we've got a productivity issue in the UK. We are lacking in any case around this. So adding more problems to it is just not great for profitability as well as productivity. Customer attrition. So a ripple effect will always, in some way, shape, or form, leak out probably to the end customer. And the end customer, the customer experience is really, really important. Retaining customers is as important as retaining your people. Every time you lose a customer, it is even more expensive to try and go and find a new customer. So keeping your customers is important. Poor brand representation, depending on what the particular role is, it might literally be in a front-facing, brand-facing role. Equally, it might be something behind the scenes. It might be something within the operation and something that isn't working right, a slapdash particular process that's put in place, something missed. All of a sudden, that gets out to your customers. That's poor brand representation. And we do know that people do like to have a moan about things that go wrong. They like to, name and shame things publicly. So that's really important that we think about that particular ripple effect. Lost opportunities. So while someone's working on an opportunity, particularly in sales, I guess that might be it, but equally in a leadership role, those opportunities that they've built up whilst they've been working there for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, they typically don't actually get fulfilled to any degree of satisfaction. And when the person leaves, so do those opportunities quite often with them. They may not be a sales opportunity that goes to your competitor directly, but it isn't fulfilled here within your organization. Lost technical know-how. You might have recruited someone specifically, you might have put them on a training course in the early days, that technical know-how goes. Or alternatively, you bring somebody in that upsets the apple cart, and some of your really tried and tested people that have been with you for a long time start to think to themselves, this person isn't right for me. They've upset the team dynamics and I want to go. And that technical know-how could go as well. And then, of course, there's all sorts of legal payouts that you might have to follow up on. And I don't just mean legal payouts with, with solicitors or for compromise agreements or something like that. I don't just mean those, but if you haven't fulfilled contracts, if you haven't hit SLAs, those sorts of things, those legal payouts might be included there, or lost profits or reimbursements, that sort of thing. So the ripple effect is really quite vast. It goes way beyond just the 1, 2, 3 salaries that might have been impacted, and it can go and extend beyond just the simple recruitment fee. By the way, recruitment fees are extremely high these days. So where does this fit? This fits, of course, within this kind of concept of the recruitment initiative. The ACE model fits within there. But actually, I just want to talk about very simply how we would position the recruitment initiative. So all recruitment should be done in relation to a business need. If you're recruiting people and you don't have a business need for it, you're potentially already setting yourself up for a challenge. Now, I do understand that some apprenticeships and some graduate recruitment, that kind of thing, can be done just outside of immediate business needs. We might find, in a recruitment campaign, we might be thinking, well, we'll take 6 people instead of 4 because they're great people. And I can understand that they may not slot straight into a role, but actually the majority of recruitment should be linked directly to a business need. Why are we recruiting this person? What is it we expect from them? What are we seeking to achieve with that person? So that then falls into the recruitment initiative. And then broadly speaking, you've got 3 phases. You've got the candidate attraction phase, the candidate assessment phase, and then of course the candidate selection phase within that recruitment initiative. Now, you could argue a little bit of the onboarding, etc., is part of that, but for this model now, just think about those 3 phases. And as you can see, we're just using today the assessment of interviewing, the interviewing part of assessing a candidate. I personally would suggest you think about lots of other different ways that you might want to assess people. But specifically today, we're going to talk about interviewing. And that is merely because the majority of organizations will probably use that as the primary source of making a decision. There are other things out there, psychometrics, assessment centers, etc., etc. So we need to be thinking about before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. And I would even say that that extends the before even extends before the candidate attraction even. So thinking about the job spec that you're writing, we believe that you could use the ACE model to support you with the development of a job spec. And you would be quite amazed at the number of people that don't actually have a job spec when they start within a role. So that's what we're talking about in terms of the recruitment process. Now, what I'd like to do is spend a little bit more time, now that we've positioned that, talking about the ACE model. So this is all about identifying your ACE candidate. How do you go out there and find your ACE candidate? And you can see that actually there are two words for A, two words for C, and two words for E. And I do appreciate that within the industry, people use terminology interchangeably. And so therefore, I just want to position these definitions with you so that you've got every chance of understanding how the ACE model can work. So in terms of A, we've got attitude and agility. There are lots and lots of phrases out there, things like hire on attitude, not on skill. And on the surface, I think those are great sayings. I do like them. However, in practice, in principle, that isn't always easy, is it? Because sometimes we need someone that can come in and hit the ground running, you know, whatever that role is. If it's a leader, if it's someone within the operation, if it's somebody in a sales role or something like that, we want them to come in, and we actually don't have lots and lots of time for them to bed in. We actually need them to hit the ground running. And so therefore, this concept of skills is really, really important. In essence, what we really want is we want them to have a great attitude, and we want them to have the necessary skill sets and experiences, etc., that we want. And I would understand that, and I can really believe that that's there. It's not always what can happen, but actually it's what we want, you know, out there in the real world. So attitude is hugely important. And actually, sometimes there are phrases out there where people will say things like, well, if you hire on attitude, we can teach them anything. If you've got someone with a great attitude, you can teach them everything. As a learning and development professional, I just want to challenge that mindset of just because someone's got a great attitude, you can teach them everything. On the surface, it sounds right, doesn't it? But actually, how people learn and the way in which learning happens is really quite a complex thing. And that might only really work if you've got a learning culture within your organization. And a learning culture isn't just that people want to learn, but actually that people are prepared to knowledge share and coach and mentor new people coming into the organization. So actually attitude is everything, but it's everything alongside everything else in ACE. And that's why agility is really important. So we're probably familiar with the concept of agile thinking. That's like the capital A. I'm just talking about the behavioral concept of being agile. It's really important that you understand the agility of the people that are coming into your organization. So for example, sometimes we need movers and shakers. We want people to come in, shake things up, and make progress and get things moving. And on the surface, again, that sounds brilliant. Yeah, of course we do. We want to drive, we want dynamism, we want progress, we want pioneering spirit. And that sounds great. Of course we do. But what's the cost of bringing in that kind of character? And that kind of character doesn't have the same agility levels as other people within the team. So there will be people that are already bedded in that, yes, you're wanting them to potentially move quicker. But actually, if you bring someone in that's going at 100 miles an hour, but the team is only going at 50, you've got to be certain that the culture can support those different types of characters coming in to your business. So therefore, you want to be thinking about agility, attitude and agility. And actually, what is people's learning processes like? How do they go about learning? I don't mean, are they visual learners or auditorial learners? I don't mean something quite as simplistic as that. I just mean, what is the process by which they go through learning? Are they people that learn at speed? Are they people that want to take time? Are they traditional courses? Are they better off being suited to a mentor? That kind of thing. Understanding that when you bring someone in is really important, as we'll see later in the interview stage, because actually how you onboard them is everything. So attitude and agility, hugely important, both of those. Then, of course, we've got competence and capability. Now, I know in the industry, a lot of people refer to competencies and capabilities, often interchangeably, and that's okay. If you do that, no problem. The distinction that we are making here with the ACE model is that competence is around that knowledge, those behaviors, and those skills. And capability is more around, are they actually capable to fulfill what the job's requirements are? Very often we can interview someone, we can recruit someone, and their competency levels seem quite great. They're up there, they're scoring 4 out of 5 on their competency matrix, that sort of thing, and we think brilliant, great hire, attitude seems to be positive. But actually, when we bed them in, they're just not capable of fulfilling the needs of the job. So it might be that they do actually need to have remote working. And that is increasingly becoming a challenge for many employers, the concept of hybrid working, remote working, those sorts of things. The concept of actually, many parents are co-responsible these days for the way in which they, address childcare and stuff like that. So someone might not be able to be away for long periods of time, or they might only be able to work at certain times in the day. And actually, if you have a role which is being, physically at a desk or something like that, and you haven't set the expectations or understood their expectations around what their capability is to work within the role, it doesn't matter how competent they are. So it's really important that you ask questions within the interview phase to make sure that you understand their expectations and you set expectations there. And then finally, around experience and evidence. I think experience is a lot. A lot of people will say things like, why do we need 5 years experience? I can really understand that. Why do you need 5 years experience? Why not 4 years experience? Why not 6 years experience? I think those are great questions to be asking internally as to why we've set the expectation that someone needs to have 5 years of experience. However, I do think what you do need to do with the ACE model is understand the relevant experiences that you want them to have had. So I don't mean time served, but the actual experience. I want someone to have experienced this, this, and this. And therefore, I'm going to test for it at competence level. So I want someone who has got experience selling into the C-suite. Brilliant. So I can identify that through a biographical part of their CV. And then I want to test for that at competence level. Can they actually do that? Have they got experience, and where, and is it relevant? And can they actually do that? But do you know what? What's frightening is that 13%, a recent poll that Competitive Edge did, 13% of managers, hiring managers, actually followed up with the evidence. So, for example, if you wanted someone to have a leadership qualification or a project management qualification, it was on the CV, you asked them about it, where did they study it, etc., but no one actually looked for validation of those particular claims. 13% of people did in a recent poll that we did, and that was well over 100 managers, by the way. That's frightening. Following up on references, those sorts of things. So actually, we ask people for their experience, we read their CV, we believe their CV, we believe the answer we're being told, and yet we don't necessarily follow up for evidence of those. So if someone tells you that, for the last 6 months they were the top salesperson, how do they prove it? How can they actually go ahead and prove that? Because it's easy to say, but it's not necessarily easy to produce the evidence if they don't have it. So ultimately, the ACE model is all geared around the process of finding those candidates that are going to give you the best cultural fit. You want the people with the right attitude that aligns to your organization's values. So be thinking about the way you do things in your organization. Does that attitude fit to those values? And are those people agile enough to cope with the changes that are going on in your organization, whether they're fast changes, slow changes, etc. If your organization is working too slowly and you bring someone in that wants to move at pace, that will frustrate them. And that frustration will either be demonstrated internally, or that person might leave and go somewhere else. You also want to know, are people behaviorally competent? You know, do they have the skills? Are they capable of meeting the needs of and the challenges of the role? And then, of course, finally, there you can see that on that summary slide. Have they got the necessary experience that you really need them to have? And can they actually evidence any of those achievements? So that's the ACE model. So the question is, how do we use that before, during, and after the interview stage, and of course within the recruitment initiative in general? So beforehand, you can use the ACE model to really start to align the sorts of people that you want in your business by thinking about the job role that you've got and the team dynamics of the people that you've got within your business, within your teams, within your departments. You can also start to think, okay, so if that's the kind of way we do things around here, if that's the culture of our organization, how are we going to build a screening system that can actually use the ACE model to start to screen out the people that aren't right for our organization? And going back to them with some feedback will be important. Now, during the interview phase, it's really obvious, isn't it? You're going to, because it's about asking questions, because it's about having conversations, this is all about how you build a suite of questions that align to the ACE model, which of course align to the job description, which of course then you apply during the interview process. What's a great thing about using the ACE model is it will help you reduce cognitive bias. Will you remove it entirely? No, and that is impossible. And it's a great goal for us to all collectively in the UK be working towards, and wider, of course, to try and remove all forms of cognitive bias. I think it's probably really, really challenging to do that just because of the way our brains work. However, the objectivity of using ACE before the interview process and then during the interview process can help to reduce cognitive bias. Now, here's something that's really important. What happens after the interview? Because a hiring manager and a recruitment team have a responsibility to the business, to your business, and of course, to the applicant and all of the candidates that have applied for the role. And actually, it's about how you remain a custodian of your brand. So every interaction with your brand, from your EVP, your employee value proposition, literally starting from the attraction and the recruitment part of the business, that is really important. So you want people to have a good experience with you as an organization, and a good experience isn't easy to manage when you're actually going to say to someone, I'm ever so sorry, but no, this business isn't right for you, or we're not right for your business. And so just a little bit later on, I'm going to talk briefly around how you might be able to use the ACE model to structure some really, really good feedback, which is what people crave when they don't get a job. Most people don't enjoy the rejection letter and do something useful with it. What they crave is feedback. Why wasn't I right? And actually, as an objective measure, you can demonstrate to someone why they weren't necessarily right for your organization. So let's think a little bit here around the questions. Now, of course, in an interview, why are we asking questions? Of course, we want to, in inverted commas, get a feel for the person. Of course we do. But actually, it's something far deeper about that. We're asking those questions for these specific reasons. We want to identify the ACE candidate. We want to see if they're suitable for the role that they've applied for, really important. And if they're not suitable for that role, are they suitable for any others? Really, really important. We need to look about cultural fit, team dynamics. How are these people going to land with other people within the business? And then here's three really important things that you really do also want to understand in the interview phase. You want to understand motivations. Motivation is huge. It's everything. And so the more you can understand people's motivations, why they want to be in that company, why they want that role, where they want to go with their career, etc. The more you can understand that, and it doesn't need to be a direct interrogation with that, the better chances of success you're going to have. But equally, those two bullet points right there at the bottom are huge. And I don't want those to be misunderstood in any way, shape, or form. You're asking questions because you want to understand that person's expectations. What do they expect when they join your business? What are their hopes? What are their expectations? What are their fears? But most of all, what are they expecting when they start? What do they think will happen as they grow through their career with you? What do they think will happen? Equally, it's about setting expectations. Too often I've sat in interviews and I've heard people sell jobs. They sell the hard sell. You will be put on this and you will be put on that and you will be given this opportunity. Why? Because that person that's interviewing them is seeing what they believe is a great candidate in front of them and they are selling them the job. Now that is a problem, because if you don't meet those expectations, you have a disconnect between you and that new person. And it will only be a certain amount of time before those motivations that they've got for themselves and for what they want to achieve aren't being met, and their expectations aren't being met. And if you don't meet them, guess what? People become upset. They become disgruntled. They become, to the worst possible scenario, disengaged people. And we all know that people mentally check out of an organization before they physically leave. So you might have someone for 6 months, but they've mentally started looking for another job 3 months into their employment. So you're paying them for 3 months. They're in front of your customers. Their expectations and motivations aren't being met. Their morale, their engagement levels are down. And who knows what the ripple effect of that particular behavior might be. Now, just quickly, we've got a few concepts of some questions. We haven't got time, unfortunately, just due to the nature of our time together here to go through all of this. There are lots and lots of types of questions out there. Here are some really good ones to be thinking of on the left-hand side. Open questions, obviously expansive, closed questions are more narrow, yes, no answers, all the way down to one of my favorite ones, numerical scale. I think a numerical scale in an interview is brilliant, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, etc., etc. Those types of questions are really important. And I would encourage you to look at how you can build some of those question types within your interview structure. All of those can be directly relatable to ACE, no problem at all. Now, there are different categories of questions as well, as you can see on the right-hand side. So a biographical sort of question would be around their experiences and their CVs. Competency-based questions, many people know about competency-based questions now. I do think they're still valid, but I do appreciate that some people are now starting to struggle with them. Strengths-based questions, that category of questions, really important, looking at and understanding what people are particularly good at, particularly skilled at, where their strengths lie, really good. Situational judgment, brilliant for understanding what people would do in certain situations. And when you really build that into things like assessment centers, that can help you understand people's learning methodologies and even their agility levels. Opinion-based, be careful with those. They can be brilliant if you're starting to ask people about their opinions about sort of industries and industry trends or something like that. But if you're asking them about things like political persuasions and stuff, just be very careful asking questions like that, because you will put yourself particularly in some hot water if you ask the wrong sort of question. Industry technical questions, they relate specifically to things that, you know, qualifications, those sorts of things, or understanding of an industry type. And then, of course, the sort of suite of questions around psychometrics, behavior profiling, emotional intelligence testing, that sort of thing. Now, you can use the ACE model again within those sorts of or those categories of questions. If you have requested from us the sort of the cheat sheet when we put out the insight piece, you saw very clearly that we had some questions there. If you haven't had that, please do ask us for that particular cheat sheet, and we'll get that over to you as soon as possible. Now, one of the biggest challenges that we find when we are either observing people in interviews or we are part of an interview process is that hiring managers quite often just ask a question and then they just listen to the answer and they sort of nod at the answer. They write a score down or they write some notes on it, and that's it. You had your go at answering the question, and we're just going to move on to the next question. One of the greatest skills, I think, in interviewing is actually coaching, the coaching style of interviewing. And that is, if your predominance in interviewing is to try and catch someone out to see if they're any good at answering a question, well, then I would argue that you're kind of narrowing in on the exam style of interviewing. And I think there are some hidden dangers there that you need to be careful of. You just don't know what's happening in that particular person's life, you know, and actually just because they're having a bad day or they're not interview slick or interview savvy, or they don't necessarily know how to add something up particularly quickly in their head when they're at an interview stage, I think you might be doing yourself a significant disservice in that area. And so therefore, I don't think you should always take the final answer, the first answer, the final answer. I think you should probe for more, which of course means that you've got to expect to create some conversation rather than a question and answer, which often can feel like an interrogation. So a very, very simple way of looking at it is a flow diagram. You will obviously start off by asking a question. I'm not going through the exact start of how you start an interview. I'm talking about now when we're in a questioning phase. You will ask your question. And of course, if you're asking a question that isn't aligned to ACE, why are you asking it? Why ask the question? So make sure your questions are built around ACE. And of course, listen, just, you know, actually pay attention to the answer. And you can start to think to yourself, okay, how clear is that for me? Summarize it back to them, draw out a little bit more through the summary, and give them the chance to respond. But actually, if the answer doesn't give you any sense of certainty, ask for more information on it. And that can be done in a very conversational or coaching style. Okay, thank you for your answer. What I got from that was X, Y, and Z. Just building on X a little bit more. Just tell me a little bit more about that. Give them the opportunity to draw out more. You know, most people don't have lots and lots of interviews. And actually, the best people don't have lots and lots of interviews because they're in role for more time. So actually, it's about building and drawing the answer, building the answer with them and drawing the answer out. And then, of course, you can always ask if there's anything else that someone wants to say about a particular question in order to just conclude that area of questioning. Now, just a couple of moments, just brief moments on sort of avoiding cognitive bias. There'll be lots and lots of definitions out there around cognitive bias, you know, unconscious bias, et cetera, and I think the majority of people are now increasingly educated around the challenges with these. You know, a white Anglo-Saxon person who's been to, you know, private education, they start seeing a white Anglo-Saxon person, privately educated, wow, they must be brilliant because so am I kind of attitude. That's a non-conscious thing. We're not consciously going, oh, well, you tick every single box that I've written down here. Actually, it's non-conscious, it's unconscious. We don't realize we're doing it. And so the whole concept then is around understanding what those biases might be. And there are lots of them. There's lots and lots of literature on there. There's lots and lots of videos that you can now watch, you know, LinkedIn Learning, etc. Lots of things will help around cognitive bias. And there are, of course, many that you will be wanting to think about and particularly thinking about your business and the people within your business and your line managers, you will be wanting to think about the ones that are most likely to start to show their face in the recruitment and the interview process. And so therefore, learn them, share them with your hiring managers, give them learning and development, give them training, etc., role plays, practice, whatever it is that's needed in order to do that. Because if you don't, you will suffer the consequences of unconscious bias, and you will see people being recruited that aren't necessarily right for your business because the decision was made unconsciously. So ACE is an objective framework to use to try and reduce the subjectivity of hiring people. It will also help significantly having more people involved in the interview process. So, things like panel interviews can be, a really good way of doing it. And I know that there are organizations out there, we've worked with them personally at Competitive Edge, that have a, 2 or 4 sets of eyes policy. First interview, very much so a 2 sets of eyes, and then a second follow-up interview, 2 different sets of eyes, and that one might be the hiring manager that's at that one. So really important that you do that. I think, as I've already mentioned, I would encourage you hugely to think about additional assessments that extend just beyond the basis of interviewing, because that will help you be even more objective. So finally, just quickly, what is your responsibility after the interview has been concluded? Well, it is, of course, about fulfilling the processes, the policies, the procedures that you have within your business around recruitment. And remember, 45% don't have a process in place anyway. So actually, we've got a responsibility to get one in place and then follow it. And I'm hesitant to use the word, but actually, if you're a senior leader in the organization, you've got to try and enforce that it is done. And people will look to you as a senior leader in your organization as to how you do recruitment. That's often how other people have learned how to recruit. And so therefore, that will be the way in which they conclude interviews as well. And that might be not filling in paperwork. It might be not providing rich feedback or reporting back to HR key decisions. So in that rich concept of providing feedback, you can use the ACE framework to produce some feedback for someone. And actually, there are AI tools out there that many of you will have seen, that if you collect if you've prepared the necessary questions and the necessary assessment criteria that you want, you make the necessary notes, you can then train things like Copilot and ChatGPT, all of these wonderful tools now that are increasingly clever, really, really clever tools, to produce a report that you can then send to someone to give them some direct feedback and things about them that they did really well. The one thing I would say is anything you send to someone, you need to retain, because obviously that is a formal document. Any notes that you make, they are formal documents. Anything that you use within your recruitment policy, those are formal documents, and you've got to be very careful if you do start using different tools and techniques, how you prepare all of that material and store it and save it for the recommended number of years. Now, there's loads in there, and I'm conscious that we're already at 1:45, and as Des said, we want to leave some time for Q&A. I do hope that this has been really, really helpful, and I do know that we've had to go through it very, very quickly. If there are people out there and you're thinking to yourself, do you know what, I would like to learn a little bit more around ACE. I'd like to know how we could use that framework more at our organization. Please do reach out. Please do ask to have a one-to-one with me. We reserve 5 free diagnostics every month for people that want to spend some time understanding a little bit more around learning and development, a little bit more around topics like the ACE model, please reach out. There's well over 100 people that have registered for the webinar, so I can't do everyone, and my business partner Ian can't do everyone this month. But for those of you that do think, you know what, we've got a particular challenge right now around recruitment and particularly around interviewing and assessing, please reach out. We'd love to have a conversation with you. And of course, as I say, it's a free kind of diagnostic consultation call. Now, Des, hopefully we've got some people that are have been asking some questions. Can I hand back to you?
Des, I've got one that I can see right now.
Okay,
So
okay.
yeah, I'll ask that. So Chris, how does the ACE model change when recruiting into an entry level or apprenticeship role compared to a mid to high level role?
I think it's a great question, Louise. How do we use ACE model in a more entry level role? I think attitude, hugely important. I think that aligns straight to the organization's values and the ways of working and the cultural fit. So I think that's I think that one's probably fairly obvious for people to understand. In terms of agility, I think that then comes down to the organization that you're bringing that more junior person into. So understanding what department are they going into? What are those people like? Who is going to be the leader? Who's going to be their mentor? Who's going to be their line manager? How fast does the organization work at? And I think understanding that more entry-level person coming in and the way in which they work and their agility is really, really important. So I think it works specifically there. Now, competency-wise, I can really understand that we may not know they may not have the future intended 1 year, 2 year, 3 year competency requirement yet. But actually, what are the competencies that are required at the immediate point of time? So, for example, interpersonal skills. More and more people are struggling with interpersonal skills. More and more people are struggling with things like self-management skills. Commercial awareness, irrespective of that role, what is someone's understanding of commercial awareness? And I think you could probably use some competency-based either assessments or questions there to understand actually what are they good at, what do they know, what don't they know. Equally, if we're starting to learn some great stuff about some of these people coming in, they might not need certain training. They may well get the more technical side of training through the apprenticeship, but some of the predefined sort of learning pathways that are put in place, they may not need them. So I think that would be a good area to explore. Capability is capability. Have they got the capability to do the role? I don't mean the capability matrix here. I'm associating that with the competence. And then finally, of course, experiences. Well, what experiences do you want? What experiences are needed? And if you don't need any, well, guess what? You don't have to do as much around that. And of course, evidence might not be as essential in that area. So that's kind of my answer for that one, Louise. Great question, by the way.
I've got another one here. How does psychometric testing work alongside the ACE model?
Yeah, another great question. So depending on the psychometric test that you're using, many of them actually have questions, predefined questions within them to ask people. It's such a big question that I would probably say if someone is using a behavior profiling tool or a psychometric now, and then they don't believe they're getting the most out of it, please do get in touch with me, because as many people, there's quite a lot of friends kind of on the call as well. My background is 25 years. It started in that sort of psychometric and behavior profiling world. What I'm also conscious of is that sometimes people hand a psychometric report to a hiring manager and just say, well, go on, get on with it. So how does it align to ACE? Many of them will pull out different elements of attitude, agility, less so around competence and capability. But it will give you an idea of the character and the behavioral style of someone. So it gives you an understanding of how somebody might, predict. We can start to predict someone's behavior within a role and within a team setting. On its own, one profile on its own doesn't always tell you a great deal. It's actually understanding that profile in relation to other people and how they would work, and those team dynamics, or customer styles or something like that. And you can start to plot that whilst you're building the role using ACE. You can start to look for the things that you would want during the psychometric phase.
Okay, great, thanks. I've got another great question here, Chris, which is, what are the most common themes that you see that lead to poor hiring and poor hiring culture in the diagnostic sessions that you've referenced here as a free consultation?
What a fabulous question. So some of the biggest catch outs are learning culture. So one of the questions I'll be asking people will be describe the culture at the organization, and I'll be listening for learning, what the learning culture is like. And is it the sort of culture which is, we are genuinely wanting people to learn and grow and develop? I'll be thinking about the coaching style of interviewing rather than the directive style. I'll be asking people what the preparation times are, those sorts of things. What I often find, Louise, in those diagnostic phases is that hiring managers, are coming out of a meeting, they are running to the interview, they haven't really looked at the CV, they haven't spoken to the recruitment department, or they haven't spoken to the recruiter, the agency. They haven't got justification for why that CV is in front of them. And so what happens is, you get into the interview, you've got an hour, maybe even 90 minutes, and you are just trying to fly by the seat of your pants. And so the preparation just wasn't there. One of the other things, Louise, job specs are not up to date. So many organizations will say to me, even where we've been involved in some of those assessment pieces, which you will well know about, and I'll say, just could you share with me the job spec for this role? No idea. God, it was updated, I think, 4 years ago, and I'm not even certain it's still relevant, that kind of thing. All of those cluster of challenges, each one of those, when it starts to build together, is a huge ripple effect waiting to happen, which isn't great. Conscious of time, is that enough on that one, or do you want more? Because I could really go on.
No, I know you could.
Sure.
I think we've got time for a few more. So what do you think is a good length of time for an interview?
I think it will depend on what other assessments are going on as well alongside it. I think if you're just doing an interview, I'd be very, very cautious about going below 60 minutes, Louise. I really, really would. I think that would cause me concern, because it would start to sound like it's an interrogation interview. I've got to ask the questions to quickly get the answers. If it's going to be a series of interviews, and of course that needs to be set out at the application stage, a number of 2, maybe even 3 kind of assessment stages, 2 interviews at 60 minutes would be okay. If not, I would think something like 90 minutes is important, but just dragging someone straight into 90 minutes might not be the greatest of things to do. You might want to give them a quick tour around your offices. I mean, obviously many of the roles are remote now, and some of the interviews are done remotely. That's okay. Of course, you can't do it in that scenario, but you might be able to give them something to read. What I would say is, if it's short, if it's like 45 minutes or half an hour, unless it's an initial conversation, literally a screening fact find, that's too short. 2-hour interview, I think you're going to start getting interview fatigue in a significant way, both for the interviewer and of course for the candidate. So I would say somewhere between 60 minutes and 90 minutes is ample. You can always put a break in.
Okay, great, thank you. I think, Des, have we got time for one more? We've just got one more.
Yeah, we've
great
got time for
question
one
here.
more, I think. Yeah, we've got 7 minutes.
Okay, so Chris, you mentioned earlier assessment activities and assessment centres along with an interview process. So this question is, what other assessment activities do you think would work alongside the ACE model?
Yeah, so if we start to think about psychometrics as one of them, I think it's really important that benchmarking is done right at the initial phase. So what I mean by benchmarking is you use the profiling tool that you are familiar with to build a benchmark of the character, the nature of the person that you want. I don't want to get drawn into the different types of profiling right now because we would be here for some time, but there are significant differences in the different types of questionnaires, and some people are very nervous about using these kind of tools in recruitment, and I really understand why. And so therefore I don't want to recommend any on this particular webinar because I don't want to isolate people and say, look, if you've been using that one, naughty you, because you know that's too big a conversation for me to do that right now. But you don't want to be using a single profile in isolation. You want to be comparing it to something else. So profiling and psychometrics can be used with the right sort of necessary caution. Emotional intelligence tests, brilliant way of understanding the character and nature of people. And actually, I'd argue emotional intelligence is increasingly one of the most important things that we need to be looking at when recruiting, both for the person that's the hiring manager and of course for the applicant. So those two areas I think are really important. Now, assessment centres are, how do I do assessment centres justice in just a couple of minutes? I think they are still a really, really, really good way of assessing people. You can do them online, you can do them sort of face to face, etc., etc. Everything in the assessment centre is based around the quality of the activity, the competencies that you're measuring, and then of course the quality of the assessment that the observers that are assessing it. And all three of those are hugely important. If you're measuring the wrong competencies, or you don't have the right activities that draw out the competencies that you want, you kind of go, well, we've used that activity before and all of our team are familiar with that activity, so kind of throw that in and let's just see how they get on with it. That isn't a great way of doing it. So if you're going to use an assessment center, you do need to invest the right time and effort into getting it right. And
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, God, yeah.
It's just I just want to try and get this last one in because I think it's a great question given
Sure.
how the legislation has changed recently. So how do you imagine that the legislation changes are going to impact organizations as it relates to hiring the right people?
This is completely and utterly my opinion because I've got no idea what other people will do, but I think people are going to be nervous, Louise. I think certain areas of businesses will be nervous because they'll be thinking to themselves, right, well, we haven't really got that sort of 2-year buffer. So therefore, what on earth are we going to start doing? How do we tighten our belts up? How do we get this right? There'll be people that are responsible for things like recruitment, and like there'll be a chief people officer, HRD, etc., that sat there going, we just don't do this right. So they'll be a bit nervous and they'll be wanting to get stuff in place to try and help their line managers. There will of course be a population of people, Louise, who couldn't really care less, and they'll just get on with it and they'll just plow on. And some of them will make it a great success, and some of them will obviously struggle with some of the legislation that really does come out. And of course, it's new legislation, so we don't fully know how this is going to impact all of us. Even I would imagine some of the most proactive of solicitors, they'll be sat there thinking, well, we need some cases now to look at and review and really understand what's going to happen if it does go wrong.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. As we come to the end of our hour together, I'd just like to sum up a little bit about what we've learned. So we've introduced the ACE model. We've talked about how it can work within your organization and the structure of it. And we've introduced some practical tools and ways to minimize cognitive bias, as well as develop well-rounded interview questions. If you have any further questions at all or wish to discuss anything specific, please reach out to us. We're happy to have a chat. We'll make sure that everyone gets the video. We've been asked that in the chat, and we'll make sure that everyone who's asked gets the cheat sheet too. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.